All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning I bid to everyone. Welcome to Professorial Lecture on Essential Learning Outcomes for the 21st Century, brought to you by the Center for Innovative Delivery, CIDL, Office of the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and International, UITM, University Technology Mara. So we look forward to having you today. Some quick notes before we begin. I think you may communicate with other attendees using the chat tab, and the Q&A will be open 20 minutes prior to the end of the session. So I will be assisting Professor Koh to read the questions. And also, please take note that at the end of the session, we will provide you with 2 links, right? The first one is the link to the feedback form and for the eCert. And secondly is the link to the PowerPoint presentation. So we hope you will benefit from this session, and we're excited to have you with us today. Before we begin, please allow me to introduce Professor Emeritus George D. Koh, our distinguished visiting professor at UITM. Right, it is an honor to have you with us today, Professor. If I can only read some of the short bio, yeah, because I think it's almost impossible to cover like 40 years or 50 years of experience with about 150 pages of CV. But I will tell you about briefly about Professor Emeritus George D. Koh. Right, he is the Chancellor's Professor Emeritus of Higher Education at Indiana University. He is a founding director of the National Survey of Student Engagement and founding director of the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. And at Indiana University, he served as a chairperson of the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies from 1982 to 1984. Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the School of Education from 1985 to 1988, and Associate Dean of the Faculties for the Bloomington campus from 1997 to 2000. So Professor Koh has been actively engaging in research with more than 400 publications and several hundred presentations on topics related to institutional improvement, college student engagement, assessment strategies, and campus cultures. So he is the consultant to more than 400 institutions of higher education and educational agencies in the US and abroad. So just a little bit more to that, Professor Koh has been decorated with numerous awards, including the American Educational Research Association, Association for Institutional Research, Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, Council of Independent Colleges, and National Center on Public Policy in Higher Education, just to name a few. And just to let you know as well, National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, NASPA, or in short NASPA, is its award for outstanding contribution to literature and research after him in 2011. In addition to that, he also received the Robert Zemsky Medal for Innovation in Higher Education from University of Pennsylvania, Distinguished Alumni Award from University of Iowa, Distinguished Alumni and Educational Leadership Award for teaching from St. Cloud State University, just to name a few, ladies and gentlemen. So I think you will know this, and 2 of his most prominent contributions in the field of higher education are his decades of research and work on essential learning outcomes of the 21st century and high impact educational practices, which has been widely adopted by the higher education institutions in Malaysia. Right. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to invite Professor George Koh to deliver his lecture.
Nadiah, thank you. What you've just heard, good colleagues around Malaysia, is that I must be pretty old if she had to read all those salutations and numbers of publications and so forth. But seriously, I appreciate that kind introduction, Nadiah, and I'm honored to be with you all this good morning. And the topic, as Nadiah has indicated, is the title of this first slide. We have lots to cover today. And the organizing question is, what should a university education be for students in this time of rapid change, difficulty in predicting what will happen next, and so on. I must say I was very impressed when I was able to secure and read through UITM's very ambitious strategic plan, the outlines of which I think comport very nicely with what I am intend to share with you this morning. What you intend to do with and for your students is very similar, I think, to the kinds of work we've been doing in the U.S. these past couple of decades, getting students ready for a very challenging life, work, family experience. So here's the plan. If it goes according to the way I've outlined this is what's going to happen. We'll spend just a few minutes talking about the demands on universities and specifically what students need to know and be able to do, and then we'll get into kind of listing of these outcomes, all of which I suspect will be fairly familiar to you. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on how we can, as the slide says, how can we assure and ensure that students actually leave the university with what we've promised. And so just a handful, 3 priorities, and then again, if it goes well, we'll have some time to converse with one another. Now, this is, you have to help here because I can't do the kind of translating into your particular set of responsibilities. So what I'm asking you to do is, as we move through these ideas, you be thinking along with me about how they relate, how they inform, how they could, in fact, perhaps challenge you to do different things with your colleagues so that UITM students indeed capture and demonstrate that they've acquired these 21st century outcomes. So the key word through all of this is intentionality. That is, we often will, maybe I'm speaking about myself here, so I'll take full responsibility for saying we sometimes, once we've gotten enough experience, we sometimes kind of move through different courses and programs of studies without standing back and saying over and over again, have I designed and implemented this class, this collection of courses, this program of study in a way that's consistent with what it is we've been trying to accomplish. So I want us to be thinking a lot about intentionality, about how we design and how we implement individual courses, programs of study, and other very powerful learning experiences, both inside and outside the classroom. So again, no surprise to you that the world is demanding more from us. And what employers want, what government wants, what individual students want is being able to hit, as we say, hit the ground running, knowing what I need to know, developing the proficiencies that will help me be successful, not just economically, but also in the larger world in which they live, interactions with others, their responsibilities to the community, and so forth and so on. And of course, learning doesn't end with the conferral of a university degree, right? Things are changing so rapidly that one of the most important outcomes is the capacity to continue to learn, right? We've been talking a lot about that. It's very challenging to determine whether students indeed have developed that capacity, but getting students to be thinking about their own thinking. I'm going to come back to that point earlier. I'm always kind of amused when I think about myself in this regard. How do you teach someone to think about their own thinking? Easier said than done. So the world's demanding more. We need more people with university level education and other levels of education as well. But also our our students, our graduates need to be better educated with higher levels of learning and knowledge than ever before. So what I'm showing here, this comes from the US, and it's the latest in a series of inquiries with employers, people who are hiring graduates from US colleges and universities. And if you just let your eyes run down this list here, 9 out of 10 employers are saying they want people who will be able to take on more responsibilities, to work harder and more effectively with people, to coordinate across department and division lines, recognizing that the challenges are going to be more complex and complicated than they were in the past. And you know, this last bullet, right? To be effective in this workplace, we are looking for people with higher levels of learning and knowledge than ever before, raising the bar for sure. I'm assuming, actually, I'll just assert that things in Malaysia are no different. I suspect that your employers are would say very similar things to the kinds of questions that were just raised. Now, here's something that surprised me. You know, I've been around the block a while, and there aren't very many things left to surprise me. But I'm showing you a slide here, and I'll say just a word about the author of this quote. Tony Carnevale works at Georgetown University at this Center on Education in the Workforce, and he and his colleagues, and he has a number of very sharp data analysts. What his center does, among other things, is they look at the nature of work. Again, this is a US-based effort, but I don't think it's different really anywhere else in the world. And so they collect data about the people who are successful in their careers. They find out where they went to university, they find out what they studied, and equally important, they look at their career trajectories, what they've done over time, the kinds of jobs they've had post-university, the kinds of promotions. I mean, they also look at income, although that's not the key variable here. And this is what they concluded. The very successful people doesn't make any difference what they majored in or where they went to university, this notion of highly selective universities. What really mattered and continues to matter to their continued success is whether they've developed what Carnevale is calling a broad set of cross-cutting capacities. Keep in mind, the major field, not nearly as important. Oh, I mean, a major may be important to get that first job, right? But after that first job, it's what else can you learn and what else can you do beyond this major field? Doesn't make any difference what you majored or where you went. And so the tilt now is in the direction of cross-cutting skills. Things that are familiar to us, I suppose, critical thinking, communication skills, being able to work effectively with others, and you know, being able to actually use what you've learned in the different kinds of settings. So yes, on the left-hand side, technical knowledge remains important and so on, but the key factor in whether a person will be successful and effective post-university is whether they've acquired these cross-cutting skills. And so here's a chart. You don't need to read every line on this chart, but what you're looking at are what is very important to people who are hiring university graduates, both executives and the people who are on the ground visiting universities, interviewing prospective employees and so forth, people who are about to graduate from the university. And so what you see here is the majority of people in the position of hiring our graduates are putting a very high value on these cross-cutting skills. If you look down the left on that list, it doesn't say anything about content of the major field, right? Knowledge. It's really all about these cross-cutting skills, which again lead one into a situation where one will be able to continue to learn beyond university. And here's another set of outcomes. Once again, you have the majority of people who are doing the hiring, evaluating university graduates, being able to solve complex problems. Very important. 2/3 of the hires say this is very important. This is what we're looking for. And you go down that list, being innovative, creative, and so forth and so on. So cross-cutting skills, however you might define that in your own context, very, very important. For the past, it's almost, I guess, almost 20, not quite 20 years, probably 15 years, one of the major associations in higher education in the U.S., the Association of American Colleges and Universities, has been on a mission, right, to help higher education and its various patrons understand what this, as they call it, new global, not so new anymore, but global century is requiring, right? College learning for the new global century. So this has been a mission, and it's very unusual for an association to stay with the same theme for multiple years. And now we're more than a decade into this work. And it asserted, lots of people, of course, contributed to the development of this document, now close to, I guess, almost 15 years old. They continue to tweak it. But it's the same theme, right? Narrow learning, not enough. And so these four kind of clusters, if you will, of essential learning outcomes, probably your eyes run through that list and you say, well, these are familiar to me. I can imagine what each of these bulleted labels probably mean. Well, let me just walk us through so that we're sure we have kind of if they're not on the same page, at least a kind of a general understanding of what we're looking at. So the first one, right? This is the all-important content that we tend to revere in the university, right? Many of us got into the professoriate because we found a field that we were attracted to. We wanted to learn more and more about it. And our enthusiasm washes over into our classes. We want all of our students to like the stuff we like, to want to learn more and more about it. And so you have it rounded out here: sciences, math, social sciences, and down the list we go. But for the 21st century, this last bullet, getting students to engage with the knowledge by learning more about what the big questions are that are facing a particular field, right? And what's likely to come next, so that I'm using the word here, animated, right? This is not just a matter of studying something and regurgitating it out in the same format, but it is to try to demonstrate more of a personal understanding and knowledge of what the field has to offer. So knowledge, content, still always will be very, very important, but it's not enough. And so we turn to the intellectual and practical skills. These are not new. We've been talking about these things for, in some instances, hundreds of years. Maybe the labels have changed. You know, we didn't talk about information literacy a lot in the 18 and 1900s, but we certainly talk a lot about it today. And the basic fundamental intellectual skills, critical thinking, communication, and so forth and so on. But again, the final line near the bottom of the slide, not enough just to write a paper or to go through a series of exercises to demonstrate that you are literate with information and quantitative work and so forth and so on. We need to practice these skills over and over and over again, not just in one's field of study, but across the curriculum, right? And scaffolding the challenges that one will face as they move through the course of study. Very important, practiced extensively. Where is it happening? I should stop here for a second and say, are you thinking about where these things are happening in your program of study if you're part of a faculty, or if you have other responsibilities in the university? How can we assure ourselves that students are in fact gaining these essential learning outcomes? And this next set, the personal and social responsibility, many universities claim that they focus on these, and it's very important, but we don't offer majors. You can't find in most of these instances, you don't find a major in civic knowledge and engagement, but yet developing these kinds of sensibilities, very, very important. And again, this last phrase, you can only cultivate this way of knowing and understanding if you are actively involved in different forms with different people in different circumstances and situations. And finally, for now, perhaps the bullet that was less familiar to most of us as part of that initial set of 4, deep integrative learning. What does that mean? Well, so I've got a few items here we could talk about, but I want to demonstrate this with a couple of more slides that take us a little bit, if you will, deeper into what we mean by deep integrative learning. But again, the last phrase on this slide, demonstrated through one's ability to apply what it is we've learned in different contexts, in different settings, working with fundamentally nasty, difficult to solve problems and circumstances. So deep learning, as this chap, John Tagg, said years ago, taking root in our ability to understand how we define ourselves as we interact with the world and how we define the world. Here's some characteristics of what it means to become a deep integrative learner. And again, as I let your eyes go through that list, I ask you again, where in the program of study for which you share some responsibility, where are students getting experience and required to practice knowing in their own words, reflecting on what information means to them, not parroting back, not memorization. Where are they getting practice in putting together different ideas? Where are they asked to take what they're learning and apply it in different situations? And this last bullet here, seeing the world and how people are interacting from different points of view. Very easy to say, not so easy to do, viewing issues from multiple perspectives. So this is a thumbnail sketch of what deep integrative learning looks like. And again, I ask you, where are students getting these kinds of experiences in your program? Now, I suspect you know what Google is. And there was a very interesting study when Google managers around, I mean, there's something like 85,000 people around the world who work for Google, and their managers were asked, what is it that you would prefer in the candidate you would like to hire for whatever opening you have? You know, there's a set of technical competencies that must be met, but what makes the difference in terms of who you would hire? Well, this is their list. It's kind of like the combination of deep learning and intellectual, practical, and the personal social responsibilities. Empathy. I mean, really, being able to understand and appreciate what someone else is going through. The second from the bottom, egalitarian sensibilities. I kind of made up that phrase myself. They said something somewhat different. But the point is, egalitarianism, we're all in this together. And so we've got to find people who are willing to work effectively across differences, be curious and generous and so on. I think it's very fascinating that even kind of a high-tech operation would be looking for these kinds of personal and interpersonal skills. Now, in this list of dispositional attributes, a phrase that I've become familiar and attracted to. And again, I'm going to ask you, if you go back to that longer list of what employers are looking for, they're looking for this kind of stuff, interpersonal competence, right? How do I express myself to others? And am I accurately interpreting what they're trying to say to me? And are my responses appropriate. And the intrapersonal competencies. Now, we don't offer majors in these areas, right? But being conscientious, flexible, being resilient, where people will argue, they've argued with me, well, students should know this, be able to do this before they come to university, as if human development stops right at the age of 17, and when they come to university, they just need to use their brain. No, not at all. These kinds of intrapersonal competencies increasing in importance in the work world, as well as family life, religious life, and so on. And this last set, neurocognitive, crystallized and fluid intelligence. Crystallized. Let me show you this. This might help, or maybe not. Crystallized intelligence is knowing stuff, if you can accept that highly technical phrase. Knowing stuff, right? The knowledge, the stuff we find in books and research labs and so forth and so on. Very important, right? In many fields, to have a mastery of the foundation of the work that's being done. But equally, and perhaps becoming more and more important, are the ability of one to move into this kind of fluid intelligence, where one is now using what they know and recreating what they know, depending upon the circumstances that they face. And so again, I think universities have been very good with crystallized intelligence. But what the world is demanding today are graduates who can take that knowledge and then bend it and integrate it and take it apart and put it back together again to respond to situations that are novel, new. We've never faced these before. Neurocognitive skills. So in my life, which I've tried to simplify over the last few years, these to me are the major tasks, especially for undergraduate education. And I mentioned this earlier. How do we get our students to think about their own thinking? In real time, if you will. Think about their own thinking and what's happening to them, both in the class, but also outside of class, as well as beyond the boundaries of the campus. This is not a natural human experience, but it can be and must be learned. And then the words, here it is again, integrate, right? Taking what one knows and having it evolve in one's own mind and applying it in different situations, to integrate and apply, transferring and using what we know. Where in the curriculum, and I'm going to give you a chance to think about this in a few minutes more, think about it more in a few minutes. Where in the curriculum, in the program of study, are we certain that students are being challenged with these tasks and demonstrating that they, in fact, can reflect and put ideas together and then put those ideas in action in the real world? So, look at this cartoon. Where does this miracle occur? And we should be a bit more explicit about how we get students to reflect and integrate and apply. So, we've got three, I guess we'd call them kind of large ideas that I want us to consider. And this first is, I think, a key, all too often overlooked, the importance of what we assign students to do that will demonstrate that they are acquiring the 21st century essential outcomes. Designing assignments that are aligned with what we say the course is supposed to do, and then we find ways, I like the word induce, compel, require, whatever you want to put in there as the active verb to get students to demonstrate these outcomes. So let's just, as the big thinker here, let's just ponder why these assignments really matter. Our experience in the US these last few years is that a lot of faculty members, as studious and as right-minded are they, often do not, well, I'll just tell you, my own experience for way too many years was I spent more time identifying what I wanted students to read in my course than the nature of the assignments I was asking them to complete to, if you will, be sure that they matched up in some way with the objectives of the course, which I have to say, in my youth, weren't all that clear to me. But now we know a lot more about assignments. This is a long paragraph, and you can read it if you want. And as Nadiah said, you'll be able to come back and look at these slides, and I hope you will. Maybe a few that you'll want to spend a little bit more time thinking about. But the best evidence comes from what students show us that they can do based upon the assignments we've given them. And as the slide says, too often we've not done a good enough job identifying both the objectives and then the way we've designed assignments to be sure that when a student completes the assignment, they've actually come closer to demonstrating that they can do what we say they're supposed to do. So what do assignments do? Well, very powerful signals about what matters. And the cue for us, another signal for us as teachers and as people who work with students outside the classroom, is to be sure that students understand what we're trying to get from them with the assignment. And when we do this well, we can induce students to higher levels of performance. And equally important, we can use the assignment to document their performance. And this work is very challenging, and we should be spending a little more time in universities figuring out how to recognize and reward faculty members who are doing this very creative work. So what would it look like? Well, of course, a good assignment depends on lots of different factors, right? But the nature of the field, the level at which students are progressing in their course program of study, many different aspects. But fundamentally, what is common to a good assignment is that we have identified some small number of specific outcomes the individual assignment is intended, right, to induce. Not too many. We can't, and one of the mistakes we make in designing some classes is we try to get students to do too much. And so what we're trying to accomplish here needs to be clear to students. It needs to be, well, I use the phrase here, an intriguing problem. Well, not every task is going to be an intriguing problem, but how do you get students to take more ownership and responsibility and more, how do you get them to just more effort in trying to complete an assignment? None of us gets better at what we do without feedback. And so if we have an assignment, we need to be sure that our assignments allow us then to give students feedback about how well they're performing in a particular part of the assignment. I've highlighted equity-minded here in this next bullet. So we want to be certain that the nature of our assignments are allowing students from different backgrounds, who have different preferred ways of knowing, who are at different levels of preparation. We want to be sure that these assignments are acknowledging that and challenging them at the appropriate level so that they themselves too are demonstrating at that level that they can perform. So scaffolding, by that we mean how do students get better at these through the course of an individual class, but also of an individual program. And we're going to get to this curriculum mapping here in a moment, but how are these assignments aligned with previous courses, right? And other kinds of work that students are being asked to do. And there are ways of doing this with what are called rubrics. Many of you have already developed rubrics for your classes, and maybe individual programs have too. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about that well, we're not going to come back. We're talking about it right now. Here's a set of rubrics that my colleagues at the Association, again, at the Association of American Colleges and Universities, about a dozen years ago, uh, there was kind of general agreement that if we could come up with a set of rubrics, not that it would cover every course, but a general set of rubrics, and you can see the list here of 16 areas in which AAC&U developed rubrics that then individual faculty, individual institutions could take and redesign to fit their own circumstances. And so they look something like this. We're not going to try to go through these rubrics here tonight, but you get the idea. So if you go down to the second from the bottom, communication skills, this is probably a little bit easier for us, or it is at least for me. On the far right-hand side of this slide is kind of the basic level of performance, right? And so you develop, well, let me just back off with an aside here. Years ago, I was teaching a class, and I had a graduate student assistant who had taken the course I was teaching. She had taken it before, and she said one day to me, Prof. Koo, I think the papers in this class would be better if the students had a better idea of what you were looking for. What? Like, can't they read my mind? What do you mean? I don't know. I'm guessing there are one or two people who are tuned into this who will appreciate what I'm about to say. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, if we had a set of rubrics for the papers in this, rubrics, really? Yes, if we could just identify things that you were looking for in the paper, and then students would be more attuned to making certain that they were spending time on those areas. I said, well, Megan, that's a terrific idea. Why don't you go and develop some rubrics? Well, this is what faculty members experience. First, it's more than a minor challenge to start from scratch and develop rubrics. But once the rubrics have been developed, and by the way, these are not set in stone or concrete. You know, they're intended to be modified over time, and an individual paper may be so created that the set of rubrics may not apply as well as they might in other circumstances. But once you develop a set of rubrics, not only do students have a clear idea of what I, as the instructor, I have a clearer idea of what I'm looking for. And so my review, my evaluation of student papers was more efficient, with plenty of room, as it, for additional creativity and so forth and so on. So the way these things are set up is you read from right to left in this instance, and the interpretation and evaluation of the presentation gets more and more complicated. So if you've not played with rubrics before, I hope you spend a little bit of time looking at not just this slide, but colleagues who are using rubrics, because they can make learning and teaching far more efficacious, efficient, and valuable. So I, for years, was affiliated with the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, and one of the projects we were involved with was to develop an assignment library where faculty members would present their very best assignment, looking at the kinds of criteria we've just been talking about a little bit. And they were put in situations where they met in small groups from different disciplines. So you presented your assignment and you got feedback from people from different points of view, revised it. And so they've now been archived, if you will, at the NALOA website. And if you've got some time on your hands, you might have a look at that link and see how your own assignments, your very best assignment, kind of stacks up against some of the best work that people in the U.S. have been doing. That's NALOA's work. So we have assignments in your individual course, but a program of study needs to be more than just a collection, right, of courses, which too often is exactly what happens. You get faculty members, they may come together, and there are a lot of assumptions about who is teaching what and what students are learning in an individual course, and those assumptions are left unchallenged. How do we know that the curriculum that we've hopefully intentionally designed, and now, you know, please don't dislike me forever, good colleagues, oftentimes the curriculum is not intentionally designed. It is put together in a way that allows me as an individual faculty member to teach what I know and what I like. And when you have a number of independent actors like me teaching what I know and what I like, there is no guarantee that courses will be put together in a coherent way that will allow students to demonstrate they've achieved what the university and what an individual program of study says, what we've promised them, right? So how do we know in this educational journey students are getting what we've promised? So we call this curriculum mapping, this process by which we try to guarantee or assure ourselves and our students that they are acquiring the proficiencies and skills and dispositions that we say are valued. Curriculum mapping. Let's have a quick look at what we mean here. So you design a curriculum, put together a curriculum map, we'll talk about that in a moment. You get an idea, a more fulsome picture of what the curriculum looks like and how individual courses contribute to what we say the program is intending to do and what the university is intending to do. The curriculum map also helps us to understand where the strengths are in our program of study and where the certain learning outcomes are addressed. And this third bullet, this is what becomes, well, mildly embarrassing, but very, very valuable. Through a curriculum map, we can identify areas that are not being addressed. Oh, Professor Koo, you say that can't possibly be the case. In almost every instance, when a faculty goes through the curriculum mapping process, they will find areas that are not very well attended because we assume certain things are happening in courses other than our own. Curriculum mapping also can help through deepened conversation, figure out whether students are taking courses in what we would call the optimal sequence, and that is, what are we learning in this course that we need in the subsequent course and so forth, and maybe certain things are happening in that third course that ought to be happening in the second in the sequence, right? And academic advisors that get a better sense of why the curriculum is put together the way it is, and we are more articulate when we talk with students about why they should be taking a particular course at a particular moment in time. So this is what we can find out. You know, are all the courses addressing what we think are these desired outcomes, and are they at the level that they ought to be? Are outcomes not just introduced but then reinforced? Do students get to practice all of the outcomes before they are assessed, before we determine whether they are at a level of proficiency? And curriculum mapping also can create a more coherent learning experience for students. You know, there is an unstated assumption in at least the universities with which I'm familiar, and that is we assume students are making meaning and making sense of the courses they are taking. And I ask you, why should they be able to do this on their own? What is the magic elixir that will allow a student to make connections between courses that on face value, on the surface, seem not to be connected to one another just by looking at them? So curriculum mapping can help us create more coherence out of a program of study. Okay, so when we talk about mapping, just spend a couple more moments on this. We're looking at the outcomes, both at the program level and the institutional level. And so we would develop this kind of, not kind of, starting with this, as we say, two-dimensional matrix. Okay, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is what a curriculum map looks like. You've got across the horizontal axis there, learning objectives, right? So we got one objective, we've got a second objective, a third, and so forth and so on. And here's our curriculum. These are course numbers. You know, there's also a title to a course, but we don't need that. And so what we do is we get together as a group of faculty, and we say, okay, here's the introductory course, and now here's the learning objective. 1, 2, 3. There may be 3 or 4, maybe more. Again, we don't want too many objectives in a given course because that means students are probably only skimming at the surface. They're not getting as deep into some of those objectives. And so we go down through the curriculum and we map this out to see who's covering what, where, to what degree. This is even more complicated. I'm not expecting you to memorize this and go back with your colleagues today and chat about it, of course, but this is what it would look like, right? So we've got this introductory course, and we're introducing this student learning outcome, SLO, right? So here we're introducing it, and later we're reinforcing it and reinforcing it and reinforcing it, right? So if a program of study, if a faculty group got together, this is what they would begin to chart. The value of this is not filling in the individual cells. It is talking about what it is we're trying to accomplish in a particular course, in a particular set of outcomes. So we identify which courses are addressing which learning outcomes. And what we want to do is to make this a consensus building experience, not individual faculty members. In fact, what often happens is if we have individual faculty members map the curriculum, they end up with different maps because they are making assumptions about who is covering what, where in their respective courses. Curriculum mapping. All right, the final third priority for our time together today. Effective educational practices, emphasizing these inside and outside of the classroom. What am I talking about here? Well, I haven't mentioned much about out of class learning and experiences. But it is the case that on average, students are spending 7 out of 10 of their waking hours, they're outside the classroom. Right? They're not in labs and studios and individual courses. They are doing other things, and they're often doing them with people their own age, well, peers, however you want to define that word. Sometimes this is happening. These are other university students. Sometimes it's people where they are working. And what we know is that we can create out-of-class experiences that are more educationally purposeful. And some of those dispositional attributes we were talking about earlier often are honed outside the classroom when students are interacting with one another and other aspects of their life where they have to demonstrate conscientiousness and resilience and getting along, right, playing nice with people who are different than themselves, right? And so what we are discovering in different ways with some research in the US, a lot more empirical evidence, data showing that we can design out-of-class experiences that benefit students in unusually positive ways. Now, of course, this happens inside the classroom too. So we've been very bullish on trying to develop more engaging teaching approaches, right? And the way we assess students to, again, have them demonstrate the kinds of outcomes that we think are important. This first bullet, I don't know if my highlighter is showing up. Is my highlighter showing up for a classroom? organization, this first bullet, what we've discovered, and perhaps you already know this, if a teacher would spend 4 and 5 minutes at the beginning of every class reminding the students, what we did last time here, the 2 or 3 most important activities and outcomes that we emphasized in the last class, and then foreshadowing what we are going to do today during this class hour, right? Here are the 4 or 5 most important things, tasks, types of information, whatever it might be, we are going to cover today. If a faculty member does that for 5 minutes at the beginning of class, students learn more from that individual class. And then if you can imagine doing that throughout the course of an entire academic year, however you're organized, when a faculty member does that, students are now being cued as to what to attend to, what to listen to more carefully, organizing, creating kind of a conceptual map. It's a simple thing to do, really, but often we say, well, Professor Koo, I have so much to cover. Students will be able to figure this out on their own. Some do. Many more would benefit by doing this very simple beginning of class. And of course, there are many other things that we can do that are engaging pedagogies, and you can let your eyes run down this list. I'm very, very interested in peer tutoring and peer mentoring and peer coaching. We've got a bit of a movement here going on in the US, and how effective when those peers are trained as tutors, and more students who could benefit from tutoring but never show up at the tutoring session. When they are connected with peer tutors, many more do so and benefit. Well, you can kind of go down this list. We're not going to go through this entire list today, but it's illustrative of the kinds of things that can work in an individual classroom. And then we know things about what is important to help students progress. And so I say, make effective practice mandatory. Not all of these phrases perhaps will resonate in the Malaysia context. I don't know. But what we do know is that advising is very, very important. And there was a period of time in the US where we thought we could be more effective with advising if we just let the computer do it. Well, that was a bit of a mistake, because students still need and appreciate and benefit from individual contact. Now, this can be done asynchronously. I'm not saying it has to be, sitting right across from one another, but the kind of coaching and advising that seems to work is done in real time. And you don't wait for the student to show up. You reach out. You say, "Where are you?" And there are certain moments, certain times during the course of an academic year program of study. I don't know whether students are allowed to register for class late in Malaysia, but it happens too often in the United States. That is, 3 weeks into the course, a student will show up and a faculty member would allow that student to begin a particular course. And what we know from data is that most of those students do not do well. So here's another list of effective practices that we know, when they are embedded in the program of study, in the university students' experience, are very, very beneficial. And I'll just look at this last one that's highlighted at the bottom here. Again, data showing, Nadiah mentioned the work on high impact practices during her introduction. Many institutions now are redesigning the curriculum and their graduation requirements so that every student will have to, participate in at least 2 or more what we call high impact practices. High impact practices, again, our friends at AAC&U have developed this, I call it affectionately, officially approved list of high impact practices. I suspect that most of these 11 are familiar to you. You have some idea, what a writing intensive course would look like, what a learning community may be in your context. Certainly doing research, with a faculty member or independent research, study abroad, community-based learning, internships, and capstone courses. These are things that I'm confident that UITM offers to students. And all I want to say tonight, I mean this morning, sorry friends, where I am, it's nighttime. A student who does one or more high impact practices benefits in unusually positive ways. This is what was a major surprise to us about 15 years ago when we started to do this research. The students, all students in general, benefit. That is, they're more likely to complete their program of study, they're more likely to be engaged and so forth and so on. And what we discovered is that students who come from what we are calling historically underserved populations, and in the US, this would mean the students who are first in their family to go to university, students who are less well prepared academically, students who come from minoritized backgrounds, would be a student of color in a predominantly white university. These groups make up the historically underserved population. Participating in a HIP has salutary effects. That is, these students get a bump in their performance that is unusually positive. And at a later date, we'll talk more about why that is. If you participate in a high impact practice, the psychological size of the institution, I say, shrinks. You get to know a small group of students, other students very well. You get to know a faculty member, a teacher, particularly well. And these HIPs all require hands-on applied learning. Remember what we were hearing from employers earlier. They want to see students who've had these kinds of experiences. And the more high impact practices the student does, the more they benefit. That is, they have these cumulative additive effects. Well, there's lots more to learn about high impact practices, but here, just once again, you're looking at what employers say would make an applicant at their firm more attractive. Have they had an internship, right? Have they worked with people from other backgrounds? Have they, in other words, 9 out of 10 are saying, if you've done a research project with peers, for example, we're more likely to want to hire you because you're going to have the kinds of experiences that will enable you to be effective in this job. So this is a plug for the next time I'm going to be with you. We don't have a date yet for this, but this next time I'm with you, we're going to spend virtually all of our time talking about high impact practices, why they matter, how to create them, how to make them more effective and efficient. So now we can pause. Thank goodness for you. Thank goodness for me. We can pause and see what's come through the transom in terms of questions.
Right.
Comment.
Okay. Wow. Thank you very much, Professor Ko. I'm just trying to absorb all this information. It's very insightful and deep. I mean, there's a lot of things that we have to reflect back on. I mean, when we talk about the mapping and the skills that should be highlighted and the deep integrative learning, I do have a few questions already. Some is from the Q&A, but I'm just going to read this one first. When you talk about the mapping of the courses, the sample curriculum that you showed, do you think students will be overloaded, all right, with overzealous program developers try to fit in the 21st century outcomes? Would that, yeah.
Will we be expecting too much of students? Is that the question?
Yeah, like, do you think students will be overloaded, like, with all these expectations from overzealous program developers, they will, you know, when they're trying to fit in the 21st learning, essential learning outcomes for the 21st century, would that, like, in a way be overwhelming for the students? Would you know, what do you think?
Well, it could be, but we should be better at our work and be certain that it's not overwhelming. So what we're trying to do with curricular mapping is to be certain that students are getting, well, I almost said getting an opportunity. And I've tried not to use the word opportunity because opportunities are vacuous. What we want to be certain about is whether students actually participate. They actually do. You know, the world is full of opportunities, but what we want to be certain is that students actually do the things we say are important. What curriculum mapping offers us is the opportunity. What curriculum mapping allows us to do is to be certain we aren't overloading students, and that the individual courses that we are suggesting, asking, requiring students to take are done so in an intentional manner, and that they are building, if you will, a coherence of the program of study. And so we decide not to load too many objectives or student learning outcomes in a particular course, but rather we spread them throughout the curriculum. Yes, we have to create some baseline in those early introductory courses, 1, 2, and 3. But to me, the way we assure that students are not going to be overloaded is we do it in a more intentional, coordinated, thoughtful, and data-informed way. And we do that with some of these procedures we've talked about.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor. Yeah, data-informed ways. I think we have to be sure that all this are tested and analyzed, and I think data analytics comes into this, and we have to be sure of what we're doing and not just, you know, on the basis of assuming or, yeah, we have to have...
That's exactly right. These, you know, this curriculum mapping process, which we went through in a hurry, is intended to be conversation starting, so that we, in fact, as a community of practitioners, we come together and talk about what we are doing together as contrasted with independent operators, right, and making assumptions about who's doing what, when, and how well.
All right, thank you, Professor. Okay, moving on to the next question. I have a question here, a few questions, several questions here. Professor, according to some studies, students lack critical thinking skills, and since this skill is vital for the 21st century workplace, what actions can universities take or to instill critical thinking skills among students?
You're not paying me enough to answer that question. Well, first of all, this is a contextual question, you know, the person who posed the question is probably well aware that most people who talk about critical thinking do not agree as to what it actually represents. So critical thinking has to be looked at in the context of the particular discipline, and what it means to do critical thinking around natural sciences is different than what it means to think critically about written prose, right, in the humanities and so forth and so on. So by critical thinking, in fact, what we ought to do is to go back to that rubric that I showed, and I think there's a critical, well, maybe there isn't, I can't remember. But if we were to pull the critical thinking rubric from, just as an example, what AAC&U has developed for institutions to use, to modify, to adapt, we would see that there are individual kind of guideposts as a student moves from recognizing basic differences between a particular subject. Too late at night for me to come up with a good example here, but
some concept.
Yeah, it's a simple concept, and then you take that concept and you put it into a second order example where the circumstances now become more complicated. How does the person think through what that situation looks like now with the knowledge base that they have. And as they move into a higher level of being able to deduce, think about, again, their own thinking, rephrase what that question or comment or circumstance means to them. So this is it's complicated in the sense that we can't use the same thinking about critical thinking in every type of course or every discipline. We have to contextualize it. I'm not being very helpful here, but critical thinking is in the eye of the beholder. And so another thing that assignment design can help with is when a group of faculty get together and look at the kinds of assignments that they have put forth and how well that particular assignment will induce students to demonstrate their ability to think more thoughtfully, analytically about the circumstance that's been presented.
Right. Thank you, Professor. Okay, so thank you. Right. That's clear. I guess we will save that for another time. Okay, and thank you for answering that for now. And I think I have one more, because after this, there's this, one of our professor wants to ask you the question verbally. But before that, well, we're taking time to adjust that. Let me just also ask another question. All right, you've listed down all this 21st learning century learning outcomes, but okay, one question from a professor, where is happiness in the list of learning outcomes? Like, at the end of the day, it is happiness that matters, and yet we see many unhappy people graduates as life moves on. Thus, shouldn't happiness and peace of mind be a learning outcome? Thank you.
Oh, I think that would be terrific. There are universities now that are offering courses in happiness. I'm not the expert in this area, but I'm basically a pretty happy fellow. So I think what the question is doing is to kind of position us back into those dispositional attributes. You're right, happiness is not in there. And when we look back at that Google managers slide, we have a lot of dispositional outcomes: creativity, generosity, empathy. Happiness is not in there either. I think what the questioner has identified is an area that schools and other societal institutions don't think is very important. I think it's important, so don't misunderstand me, but we don't offer, most universities don't offer courses in it. There's no program of study about happiness. So I welcome the questioner to design such a course. We do have, there's been a fair amount of recent research on happiness. Bhutan, a country you may be familiar with, is built around happiness, right? They don't look at gross economic productivity. They look at whether, and perhaps your questioner and others know that the happiest countries in the world are in Scandinavia, Finland, Sweden, Norway. We could learn a lot from countries like that, perhaps. But remember, there are also significant cultural differences across countries and across groups, and how happiness is interpreted and even studied will differ substantially. So I applaud the questioner. I think it is important to look at in the large scheme of things, the balance between looking at happiness in other ways of addressing 21st century outcomes. But your questioner has given me an idea about the next time I give such a talk. I'll be sure to try to work that into what it is we should be expecting of universities and of university graduates.
All right. Okay, Professor, thank you so much for answering that question. Okay, can you just, if we can have you stop sharing the slides so we can have a bigger view of you? I think everyone would like to see and to have.
Well, I'd like to know how to stop sharing the slides.
Okay.
Wait a second.
You hover on the top of the. Remember we tried that.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Yes. Perfect.
All right, all right.
All right. Okay, Professor Suhaimi, are you ready, or would you like me to continue to another question?
If I could,
Professor, yes, okay. Prof,
thank you
yeah,
very much, Nadia.
right.
Good evening to you, Professor Kuth. I'm just wondering, at the beginning of your presentation, you were mentioning that there are things like intercultural competency and all those things that what we wanted to be in, but we have not seen this being offered as majors in our curriculum. Could it be because that when it comes to intercultural competency, the assessment of those aspects, those dimensions of those competencies are a bit difficult? And this may be the reasons why we shy away from putting those in the curriculum. Would you foresee that in future, the universities would revert back to giving education rather than paying too much attention on the assessment?
So thank you for another difficult question for me, to respond to.
Nadiah would make arrangement if you need additional payment.
My initial reaction is that there are lots of things that are difficult to assess. Well, and the previous question about critical thinking is one of those, right? What looks to be critical thinking in one circumstance from one a disciplinary perspective is different, will look different from another disciplinary perspective in a different context. But just because something is difficult to assess doesn't mean we shouldn't emphasize it. So my response, this is not to you, but the way you asked the question made me think one of the reasons we don't focus as much on intercultural competence is we don't value it. We don't value it. When you value something, that's what you should measure. We often end up measuring things that force us to value them, if you follow that difference, right? So we have tools and we can measure certain things, and by measuring those things, we're essentially forced to talk about them because that's the data we have, right? So I'm not an expert on intercultural competence, and would it be difficult to measure? You bet. But I suspect that if you found if you were to look at the experiences of students who study away, who leave their home environment and find themselves for a protracted, substantial period of time in another cultural circumstance, that whatever tool we had to measure intercultural competence, they would score high on it. More importantly, when you see them interact with people that they don't know from different backgrounds, they would approach that situation with more sensitivity and more openness. So I think the data would be there if we spent enough time looking for evidence of it.
Thank you.
Thanks you.
Right. Thank you, Professor. And thank you, Professor Jaime, for putting me on the spot there. I will discuss with Prof. Azia about the funding. All right. Okay. Okay. We have quite a number of questions. Okay, but I have to be selective. And some of the questions here. Okay, let me just start with one more. We always have problems of having too many assignments given to students in a course. Like, how do you comment on that? Students receive overwhelmingly, a lot of assessment, and what is your comment on that?
Well, I'm ignorant of the context in which the question is coming from. Assignments can be busy work. Assignments, I don't understand. I don't know anything about the design of the assignments that are coming from the questioner, right? So I'll have to try to be simplistic about this. If there are so many assignments in a course that students are weary, well, and of course the questioner is probably thinking about not just a single course, but if a student is taking 3 and 4 and 5 classes and there are multiple assignments every week in each of those classes, students could feel overwhelmed. My response is, to the individual faculty members who are designing the assignments, are you sure you're designing the assignment for the most important outcomes that your course has intended to target, to address? And so I'm going to fall back on earlier statements I've made to say, let's take a deeper look into the nature of the assignments and how intentionally have they been designed and how well are they aligned with the intended outcomes of this course, as well as what the curriculum map would tell us about how this course and its assignments fit into the larger scheme of things for the program of study and university outcomes. I can't say any more than that at this point in time. I'm sympathetic to the prospect, likelihood that students are spending a lot of time completing assignments that may not matter as much compared to perhaps a better designed assignment, maybe trying to cover less ground, but to be more integrated, better integrated into the sequence of courses in a given program of study.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor. I think that's very apt. I think you don't have enough information to work with to answer in detail. So I think, but I think that answers the question that we have to go back and reflect and see, you know, and it is sad if the students are suffering and we don't have, we should sit down again and just, you know, reflect on our current practices, basically. Right. We do have, yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know how students are suffering. Sometimes the student culture can create the impression that students are working so very, very hard, and they may be spending a lot of time, but it's not well invested time, in part because of the nature of the assignment itself, but also the student peer culture can create can perhaps blow things a bit out of proportion. You know, right. I just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Professor Azia, would you like to, Professor?
Yes, Nadiah. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Would you like to add a comment before I conclude? I think well, it's about 10 minutes to 11 p.m.
Okay.
in Bloomington.
In Bloomington.
So let's I don't
Thank
think
you.
I don't think we can afford any more difficult questions for Professor Koo.
Anyway, thank you very much, Professor Koo, all the way from Bloomington, my alma mater. I think we had a very good session this morning. I myself am learning a lot of things because some of the things that you said, sometimes we missed it. You know, we need to reflect more. We are doing some of these things, but maybe we are not focusing on the really essential things, you know, the essential outcomes and so on. So on behalf of the university and also my office, the acting VC is not here, but she sends her regards. We would like to thank you for spending your time. Actually, your it's not night. It's really bedtime really for you, and we appreciate very much all the the input that you have given. And I think most of us will take this, and people are already asking for the videos because they could not attend for the whole session. So we're going to work on what we have missed out, and maybe probably work more with you in future to make things to make our education 5.0 at UiTM on the right track and achieve what we want to achieve. Hope so, inshallah. Thank you very much.
You're very kind. Thank you for those very nice words. And again, as I said at the outset, it's an honor and a privilege to be with you. And we have some ongoing work. This is just kind of the first open session, and we've agreed, haven't we, that we'll do some additional work down the line, as well as another lecture and so on. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Nadiah, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this to the audience, to the participants who are here this morning. Professor Koo is our very first virtual professor that we appointed. That is one of the things that we want to do this year, and you are the the very first person to come online. But I don't feel that we are really separated. Actually, we can really, you know, gel with you with all the things that you've said in the last session, in the last 1 hour or so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I think I also would like to say just one last thing that my key takeaway, one of the things that I learned is to start the class with reflecting on what happened in the previous lesson, and to talk about what we're going to talk about this upcoming lesson. I think I overlooked that. I thought that could be something that is trivial or menial to me, but I think when you mentioned it, and that based on research, that this have like an sort of impact to the students learning become more, I think they are aware of what they're supposed to pick up right from there. Yeah.
May I make just a couple more comments about that
Okay.
point?
Yep, sure.
As a university professor, I was always focused on my classes.
Yeah.
Right? I was, the class would end and I'd be thinking about the class just ended, and then I'd be thinking about the next class and how I wanted to organize it. And so I was totally focused on that class. But then I think to myself, finally, after many years, the students are taking 4 and 5 different classes. Right? So between my class and the next class of mine, they've had 4 or 5 different other classes. And so it just was nonsensical for me to think that they were spending as much time thinking about my class as I was spending thinking about my class, right? And so when they've come from some other class or they've come from their job or their family, and they're rushing to come into my class, I've been thinking about my class for 2 days. They've been doing all sorts of other things in between. And so this is as the Quakers would say, this is an opportunity to center us together in this class and to remind them where as I said before, where we've been, and most important, where we're going to go in this next hour together.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing this part of the reflection. We really, really appreciate that point. I mean, with years and years of experience from you, Professor. Thank you so much. And of course, we look forward to working with you on this ongoing project. And also there will be another professorial lecture on high impact educational practices. We will set the date, and I think we will advertise as about within a month or so. I mean, prior to the date. So and for the attendees for today's session, the committee has actually shared the feedback form and insert, as well as a copy of the slides from today's lecture. So I hope you will find that useful to map out, because next week is actually for UITM, our semester is going to start next week. So I think probably we still have time to reflect on what would be the best way to do things this semester. And yeah, hopefully, thank you so much. And it's very timely that you come, the timing is very perfect, that 1 week before the semester begins. And yeah, Professor, thank you so much for for being with us tonight. And I think you can read in the chat box, people are thanking you. But if you can't find it, I will send you this conversation.
Please do.
I will send you the conversations. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful, restful evening before your flight tomorrow, and all the best to you. I will be in touch. Right.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, Prof.
So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank
Bye
you
now.
all.